Okay, we're going to go back first to the to Maran and be very articulate with his language. He says, "Soran said b'Shabbat ayedei geshamim or davar acher." If you have something of value, he calls it schora, something that's sellable or inventory, that is about to be or has just begun getting damaged as a result of rain or whatever it might be. Now keep that in mind because he's starting with this idea of geshamim, of rain, but we're going to see some differences of opinion in terms of what level of pending damage you can protect against. So we're starting when Maran is saying even something like rain, it's just rain, but it's rain, it's enough to ruin this crop. We're going to end up and we're going to go to another section of Shulchan Aruch, and we're going to talk about damage by fire. And you're going to see that there's a little bit of a back and forth here. But so for now, we understand that.
But we didn't just talk about rain. We talked about a barrel of wine leaking also. That was another
example.
Exactly
Right. Good. Fine. So talk about that. Let's keep that in mind at this point. Hey, Zach, let's keep that in mind at this point, that the damage we're talking about now is relatively benign damage, meaning that the damage that threatens this product doesn't threaten any people. Okay, that's going to be an important distinction that we're going to flesh out further. Zach, we're talking about if someone has some of his possessions are threatened by rain or there's a barrel of wine leaking on Shabbat. What can a Jewish person do to protect his assets and not violate Shabbat? So we started this on Friday. We're going to go back on the same piece because we're going to tease out some very important distinctions here. Okay, so he's saying that if it was any form of water-related damage, whether it was a stream that was going to overflow or heavy rains, this stream or nachal that would come up and cause him to lose his possession, or like there was a hole or a leak in a chavit, in a barrel of wine, that will ultimately cause this wine to be lost. And wine has a lot of value. Good. So now look at Maran's words very carefully because these words are going to play over and again, and they're very important. Mutar likrot eno Yehudi, I can call a non-Jew. Meaning what? What is he saying? He's saying that the person is not next to me. So it sounds silly, but that's an important diuk that we're going to make. That's an important point that we're going to tease out. So A, there's a threat of a loss. B, the goy she's not my housekeeper or someone walking down the street. We touched on this, Michael, you raised the point, I believe, the other day. How far can I go to get this person? We're going to talk about that more in depth. So, mutar likrot eno Yehudi, I can call that person, the non-Jewish person, to come help. Af al pi shevadai yodea she'eno Yehudi yatzil mamon. Even though it's crystal clear to everybody, to the Jewish person calling him and to the person being called, why he's being called. Now, why?
Right, it's not a remez. It's not a remez. It's not.
Beautiful.
It's not just someone there. It puts in motion everything that you're supposed to be disengaged from, right? Absolutely. So you're not supposed to think about it. You're not supposed to act on it. All of those things you put in motion.
Perfect. It's not a remez, meaning it's not a hint. And in fact, it's not only not a hint, but you said it perfectly. It puts in motion all of those things that I'm not supposed to be doing on Shabbat. And it's absolutely deliberate and direct. It's deliberate and it's direct, right? But Maran is very clear in his language. He says, mutar likrot. I can call that non-Jew. What do you mean? Like you just said, Am I allowed to do anything to protect this stuff from the side of halachot Shabbat, the world of Shabbat? Whatever I'm going to need to do to protect this stuff is going to be violating Shabbat, whether it's moving it from one domain to the other, carrying it, and it's mitzvah, whatever it might be. But over here, Maran is saying befeirush, unequivocally, go out and call the goy who's nowhere near you. You know why you're calling him. He knows why he's being called. Huge chidush.
Ricky, I probably missed it the other day, but how severe does the damage have to be for this to be able to happen?
It's a meaningful damage to you. It's meaningful damage. So we talked about this actually somewhat on Friday. It's a damage that, and we talked about it from the other side. It's a very good point. We talked about it from the other side. Michael raised the point about, what if, or I think he raised it, or Zeke, I don't remember. What about
Mark, who's my brother?
Oh, your brother, right? Okay. What about someone who's very wealthy, who doesn't care? What about someone who doesn't care? The Torah perspective is that doesn't work. And as we said the other day, we learned it from the Pachim Ktanim, from the small jugs that Yaakov Avinu went back over the stream to reclaim when he was concerned about going to war with his brother Esav. And it teaches us that we have the term in Hebrew, Sadiq Bahul al Mamonel, meaning a righteous person cares about his possessions. So the perspective that someone may not care is an anti-Torah value. Even if someone is super wealthy, but if someone doesn't care about his possessions, even the little jugs, that's a strong anti-Torah value. To the point where the HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes out of his way, so to speak, to tell us that point in the context of this whole huge war, this existential threat that Yaakov Avinu was facing, that he and his whole family is going to be wiped out. But he went back on the other side to get the jugs, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides to include that in the Torah. Why? Because we feel very strongly about that. Good. Okay, so
I
far?
lost you, Ricky.
Huh?
Oh, there you go. Oh, you went out for a few seconds.
Oh, sorry. Okay. The hasod sechora or perot or tabachem mipnei geshamim. Okay. So what are we talking about in terms of protecting it? Is it talking about covering it? Is it talking about moving it? Right now, assume it's talking about moving it, and assume it's talking about moving it from one domain to the other, meaning that you have real issues here. You have at least a drabanan, a rabbinic violation, and maybe a deoraita, a biblical violation. As we talked about the other day, I can hint to the non-Jew. So I can call him to come to my house. He's walking down the street. He's doing some work by a non-Jewish house down the block, whatever it might be. I can call him to come to my house, tell him I'd like to discuss something with him. When he comes to my house, I can tell him, anyone who saves my possession will not lose out as a result. Kol hamatzil eno mafsid. Anybody who saves, anybody who helps will not lose out as a result. Okay, now we're going to, these words are very important because we say that you can't say, Mishnah Berurah brings in a few minutes, we'll review that, im tatzil lo tafsid. If you save it, you won't lose out. Now, the distinction between the phrases is very subtle. The one that Maran says is okay is, kol hamatzil eno mafsid. Anybody who makes the effort to help here won't lose out. What the Mishnah brings down is saying it more direct, im tatzil lo tafsid, if you save these for me, you won't lose out as a result, is unacceptable. Okay, you with me?
When you're saying that, Ricky, aren't you incentivizing the person who saves it, that you'll compensate him accordingly, not a flat fee or not $10 an hour, but according to.
That's 100% what you're doing, because like we said, one of the klalim here is adata de nafshei ka'avid. You want him doing it for his own benefit. So
he has ownership in it.
He has
or a stake in it.
Right. So now we're balancing these values, right? We're balancing these different halachic imperatives. So it's true, I have a loss here. Person has a loss here, right? Person has a loss here. It's true that the rabbis care about every Jewish person's wealth and possessions and go out of their way to put that core value on people. Don't be reckless. Don't say God's going to give it back to me. Don't say, it's not mine anyway, it's all his. Don't do that. That's not real. What you should do is care a lot about what you have. So, okay, so now here we go. The rabbis are strongly emphasizing that a person should care a lot about what he has. On the other hand, I have Halachot Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat. So what do I want to do? So we said, can I protect my stuff? And the answer is yes. Why? Okay, point one, because the rabbis feel strongly that we should feel strongly about our possessions. Point two, what we said the other day was that the rabbis bring this out because their concern is that if a person isn't given a way to protect his possessions in a halachically okay way,
you'll come to resent it.
No, more than that, he's going to protect his possessions in a way that's going to violate a biblical mitzvah, right?
Got it.
Because it's better that a person will deal with this on a rabbinic level than say, I have no choice. What do you want me to do?
You may come to resent the religion if it's pouring and your entire life savings is getting ruined in front of your eyes and there's nothing you can do about it. You can say, hell with this. What am I doing?
That's right.
It's just human nature.
Yeah. So some people will,
Is this all the same for personal possessions and business possessions?
Absolutely the same. It's 100% the same. If it's your possession through your business or through your personal, it's your possession. So, yeah. So, okay. So we have,
Ricky, what if it's the other way around? Let's say you work for a company and if it's pouring and you save, the merchandise, whatever it is, you're compensated appropriately, but it's not your personal assets.
So would you lose out? Would the company lose and therefore you lose if it's not saved?
Right. If you have, let's say, if you own 1% of the company or if you have some sort of profit share.
Let's say you don't own anything. You work there and not saving this will impact the well-being of the business, and it's the same thing. Right? Because you're going to be impacted by it. Your financial well-being is going to be impacted by it.
Right, for your salary or whatever it is.
Right.
Okay.
Zach, are you there? I don't hear you or see you.
I don't think he's here.
Oh, he's not. Okay, I thought I saw him signing on.
By the way,
okay.
Ricky, when you said before that you're not supposed to just disregard monetary things that have monetary value, you're almost disrespecting Hashem if you think about it. Hashem created the world, created nature, he created beauty, created these things of monetary substance, and if you just say, oh, hell with it, I don't care about it, as wealthy as you are, it's almost a slap in the face to Hashem. Think
100%.
about it.
100%.
Assuming that you're using these items in the right way.
All right. That's the core assumption is, generally speaking, yes. Good. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me 2 apples, or not gave me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu partnered with me to allow me to have 2 apples in my refrigerator and not 1, shouldn't I be aware of that? And shouldn't I be thankful for that? And shouldn't I be careful with that? And if I'm not, it's not a Jewish perspective. This, wasting or, I don't care about the money. I don't care about the money. Now, at the same time, being stingy is not a Jewish thing either. To be very generous is a Jewish thing, right? So I want to be very aware of what I have, and I want to be generous with it. And both of those work. I don't want to belittle it and squander it.
Right. Excess is really not a Jewish thing, essentially.
That's right, exactly. Excess
having
is not a good
excess.
thing.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. Okay. So now now it says, so, and then, okay, he can tell the Jew, Kol hamatzil eno mafsid, anyone who helps and saves doesn't lose out, as opposed to telling him, Im tatzil lo tafsid. One is more contingent. One is, if you save it, you won't lose out. The other one is, it's more of a general proclamation. Anybody who saves will benefit. So it's a subtle difference. The first one, if we say im tatzil, if you save, you will not lose out, is not acceptable. The more general, the more proclamation, the more slogan, kol mafsil eno mafsid, that one is okay, because there's the subtle difference between the first one, which is slightly more direct than the second one, makes all the difference, according to Maran.
Wait,
Okay.
1 second. So if you say whoever helps will benefit, that's allowed, right? Okay, because essentially what you're saying is that if you help, you'll benefit. You have a piece of the upside. You have part ownership in this.
Good.
Right? But
You're saying,
if you won't lose out and you help, you may not lose your job. That doesn't do anything.
Im tatzil lo tafsid. You're talking about the second one. If you help, you won't lose out.
That is allowed, or that's not.
No, that's not allowed.
That's not allowed, right? Because what you're telling someone is that if you save, my life savings, you're not going to lose your job. That doesn't give you a piece of the upside or a piece of the ownership.
Nice. That's great. I like
Right.
that. Yeah, that's good.
But if you help, you could get 5% to 10%. Someone's going to be enticed to.
Right. Even if they get 1%. Even if they
Yeah,
get
1%, whatever it is.
Yeah, even if they get 1%. And so if we could nuance the language, kol hamatzil eno mafsid, anyone who helps here won't lose out, then you have a carte blanche to get the person involved. And remember, the person wasn't around. You went to get the guy. And getting the guy is a huge concession from the halakha point of view, because getting the guy was very intentional. There was nothing obscure when you went to get the guy. It was very clear to you what you were doing, even if it wasn't clear to him. The point is, it was very clear to you, and you're able to do it. So that's a huge concession, right?
Because they don't know, when they say you can go get the guy, they don't know what you're going to do along the way in order to get the guy. You could be transgressing, 4 different.
Right. The assumption is you're not. The assumption is that you're not, but you could be.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But the assumption is you're not. You go with the assumption that you're not. Good.
Okay.
Okay. Goes similar to when there's a fire, and you could make the proclamation to the public, right? To the goyim. Anybody who puts out the fire, they know mafsid. Now, in that case, we go further. Why do we go further with a fire than with water damage?
This is life-threatening.
That's right. Good. Now, we're going to talk about that. We're going to try to get there today. If not, we'll get there next time. But kol hamehabeh eno mafsid is more direct. And because, to your point, you have an issue of it being life-threatening. Now, when something is life-threatening, obviously the criteria are different. And we're going to talk about that in very important detail, either today or next time. Okay, let's keep going. There's an opinion that says that the only time you can do this is with damage from fire. But damage from water, you can't do this. Now, what did we learn when you have a stam and a yesh? When you have something brought as a general rule, and then there are those who say, who do we hold by?
You hold by the stam.
Perfect. We hold by the stam. Beautiful. So what's the stam in this case? The stam is that I can go call the goy and then tell him anyone who helps won't lose out here.
Right.
That's the stam. The yesh, the minority opinion, who says that the only time you can do this is when there's a fire is not the majority opinion, and we don't hold by that.
Right, because they would say that if it's raining or a barrel of wine is leaking, you can't.
They would say you can't, right? But we don't hold that way, right? They would say that, no, kapara, what are you gonna do?
As long as it's severe damage.
Yeah, no, but threatening damage. The point is with a fire, the damage is threatening. It's ultimately threatening beyond its immediate, immediate scope. We say that fire is a ma'avir. It's something that has legs, as opposed to, like when you're talking about the different torts and damages, for example, we say that you have a board, a ditch in the road, right? That a person may or may not have to fix, depending who's caused it, whose ditch it is, and whatever it might be. But that ditch, even though it's dangerous, and a person, if it's deep enough, a person could really get badly hurt if he falls into it, or an animal. And the person who dug the ditch or who didn't cover the ditch is responsible for the damage to that person or animal or kelim or possessions. The fire is looked at in torts and damages on a completely different level, because it's not stationary. It moves and it has a life of its own. Okay, so that's why we make the distinction with fire. Okay, now let's. I'm going to read a little bit of the new stuff that's added. So okay, so we said that you can go out and call the goy, right? You can call the goy to come and help. So they want to qualify it and be clear and say, look, when we told you go out and call the goy, we're not telling you could go out and call the goy in general to then hint to him to do something. You can't do that. The only time you can hint to a goy to do something is if the goy is hanging around, right? And it happens to be, because if it's just a regular thing, like, it's very dark in the room kind of thing, right? Which would be an acceptable hint. You can't go deliberately call the goy to come to the house to tell him, it's dark in the room. The only time you could go out and directly call him is in the case of hefsed mamon, when there would be a loss of money.
Isn't that obvious, though?
Huh?
Isn't that obvious? This is the context of what we're talking about.
It's absolutely obvious, but some people would forget it. You're right. It's absolutely obvious. It's absolutely obvious. But you're going to say, okay, look, you know what? Reuven went out and called the goy to save his wine. He called the goy and then he hinted it to him to save his wine. So I'm going to call the goy and then hint to him to do X. You're right. It's obvious, but they want to make the point.
Right, just to be safe.
Yep. About image and have said mamon and the goy, if there isn't a potential loss of possessions, of money, you can't go out and call mishum. She'etzem hakiri'ah the goy hu kiremiza derech siboy. When you're going out and you're calling the goy to come to your house, they call it remizah, a hint in the style of a command. It's really more than that. It's a command. Come to my house. Right? When you call the goy, however you call him, the intention is crystal clear. Whereas with a hint, the intention, assumingly, is not crystal clear. But over here, the intention is crystal clear. So he's saying that even though the intention is crystal clear, you could do it only because there's a potential loss of money. She'im anochri osem melacham b'chapsei Yisrael okay, let's keep going. Therefore, if there isn't a potential loss of money, could go on. If he wants the goy to put out a light that's bothering him to sleep, we say that that you can't call the goy to come to your house. What do you mean? Isn't it bothering me? Is it damaging me on some level because I can't sleep? Okay. It might be. It might be. You're getting less rest. But we want to be very clear here. We're talking about
slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope because you can relate that to anything.
Exactly. And that's
You know
why they're
this,
putting a firm, hard wall and saying,
right?
let's be crystal clear here. We're talking about the loss of money. And you should be concerned about any loss of money. But okay, it would be not, you would sleep more comfortably, this or that, but that's not what we're talking about here. That's a
Right. It's not
different
tangible.
world. No, it's not tangible. Exactly. Very good. Okay. Umashi tir the Moses Nochri, and over here where we're giving the heter, the permission to hint to an ochri, to a goy, hurak ba'ofen shagoy nimsek fab beto, or shu baderach be'ekrae. So the only time you can generally hint to a goy is if the goy is in your house, or you bumped into him just by pure coincidence, and you tell him, you give him the hint. But again, he's just repeating the same point that if that's not the case, and there isn't the potential of a large loss, you can't call the boy to your house. You can't go to his house and ask him to come. Okay, 1 second. All right, fine. Okay, good.
Ricky,
Yes.
isn't there something like that if you know the goy, then you're not allowed to, like, I remember learning something like if the goy has leftover coffee, then it could give it to you once, but then once it becomes a thing, like if they know you, then they can't do it again for the next week.
Right, that's true, because then effectively he's making the coffee for you. If he had extra coffee and he wants to give you some, it's a matana from him, it's a gift from him, that's totally fine. But what if we don't want to regulate him, we don't want to get him into the habit of doing that, because then you blew the cover, then it's not
Right.
that, something else, right? Good, exactly right. He brings another case here. Okay. The Gabe Avazim. Somebody bought ducks and chickens, and they ran away immediately after they were bought. Why did they run away? We say that these animals, these birds, once they get used to somebody's house or the holding pen that they're in, then they tend to stay there. These birds were bought right before Shabbat, and they broke out and they're starting to fly away. What do you do in that case? Now, these birds are expensive, and you're going to sustain a significant loss if you don't get them back. Now, what's the problem in this case with getting them back? What isur d'oraita are with a person? What isur would a person be over on? What prohibition would he be transgressing? So we have of what?
I don't know. To get the birds back in the cage?
Okay, to get the birds back into a cage, or to get the birds, wherever, back into the pen or wherever he kept them. What would he be
trapping?
Trapping, beautiful, Sonny. We have the concept called trapping, which is latzud. To trap is an isur d'oraita. That's straight out biblical. So, whereas in the case of saving the grain from the rain, where it might just be that the person is carrying the grain into a shelter in the same domain, and you may only have an isur d'Rabbanan, a rabbinic prohibition. In this case, in terms of getting the animals or the birds back into a pen, there's no question, it's unequivocal that you're trapping them, which to Sonny's point is not an isur d'Rabbanan, it's not a rabbinic prohibition, it's absolutely an isur d'oraita. And what do we say? We say you can do it. Okay, you can't do it. You can tell the goy to do it. Rashai lomar kol matzil eno mafsid. And saying the same thing here, that anybody who saves won't be hurt, won't lose out. Afilu iman achri tzudum b'tzeda asurim d'oraita. He says that even if the goy is going to go ahead and trap them, which is an isur d'oraita, right? So he wants to make it clear that when we hint to the goy after calling him then we hint to him that if he saves this, he won't lose out. It's not only limited to actions he may then make that are rabbinic, it also includes actions he may then make that are biblical in their transgression.
Wow.
It's a big חידוש. וכן מי שהציע במכוניתו חולה לבית החולים, ויש חשש שמא יתקלקל המנוע אם לא יכבוהו, that you can go ahead and do it. Let's say someone takes an ill person to the hospital in his car, right? The person is sick enough that you're going to get into the car and take him to the hospital. Now you got him to the hospital. What about turning off the ignition? So now this is a much bigger issue, but for our purposes now, you can do the same thing.
I would think you could. I would think you could, because it's part of the whole act of taking them. You're not going to leave the car on.
Right, beautiful. So that's why we say that Hatzalah can operate on Shabbat, right? And they get there and they can turn off the ambulance,
right,
or they can come back home. More than that, I don't know if they turn off the ambulance, but they can come back home. We allow them to, if someone was taken to the hospital and the Hatzalah guys took him, we allow the Hatzalah guys to come back home. How could you drive back home? Well, the reason we allow them to drive back home is because if they weren't allowed to drive back home, they wouldn't pick the guy up to begin with.
Right, it's part of the whole act.
If there was a Hatzalah call on Friday night and somebody left his wife and kids at 9 o'clock Friday night or 2 in the morning, whatever it might be, now you want him to stay in the hospital all day Saturday? He's not gonna be a Hatzalah volunteer anymore, because that's not reasonable. So we allow them to come back. Okay, we try to make it in ways, don't turn off the ambulance, whatever it might be. In this case, but in the end, we say, you do what you have to do, and you come back, and you turn off the thing, and you go back to your family. He's saying here that if there's a issue where you're concerned that the car, something was going to happen to the car if it wasn't turned off, certainly you could turn to the goy and tell him the same thing. Kol hamatzil eno mafsid, that give him a hint to turn it off. All right. Okay. Okay. Let's now, we're going to jump ahead to another area where we talk about these halachot that are referenced specifically to a fire. So this is on page 350, the equivalent of page 355. It's page Kuf Ayin Het, and it's Siman Shin Lamed Daled. So it's far from where we are and what we're doing, but I thought it was important to reference it to get some further understanding of this. I'll read it to you. Yachol Lomar, someone can say, B'fnei eno Yehudi, in front of a non-Jew, Kol hamehabeh eno mafsid. Anybody who puts out the fire won't lose out. So we said before, in reference to water damage or some non-fire damage, Kol hamafsil eno mafsid. Anybody who saves this thing will not lose out. Over here, we're going further. We're saying Kol hamehabeh eno mafsid. Why is mehabeh going further?
Mechabed is going further because we said he has like a part ownership in it.
Not necessarily, but why is mechabed? Let's say you have two instances. One, the goy can help you by carrying this inventory out of the rain area, and the other is by putting out the fire. So what's the difference?
One is biblical, one's derabanan.
Beautiful, excellent.
Yeah.
Putting out a fire, mehabeh. Putting out a fire is an isur d'oraita, a biblical transgression, and carrying something is rabbinic. So over here, even though there's a biblical transgression, we can hint to the goy, right? What are we saying? That the stakes are greater with a fire, so my latitude is greater with a fire.
Well,
right?
we're only talking about a fire in this I mean, we're only referencing this because it's a fire, because it's sakana.
So that's the question. That's exactly the question. Are we making this more lenient because it's fire, period?
Or are we saying
we
it's
make-
biblical in general?
Huh?
Or are we saying it's a biblical transgression in general? It could be not fire, but something else. It's not
Very good.
sakana, but it's
That's
a
the
biblical isur.
Right, excellent. That's the question. And at this point, we're stuck with that question. And we're going to be mefaret. We're going to read a bunch of things that will more or less, or may not exactly, not today, finish that question. But that's the question, right? Is there a difference here because it's fire, period? Or is there a difference here because it's fire and there's a possibility that other people are going to be harmed by it? Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Af im eno mezuman kan yachol likroto she'yavo. We said, like we said before, even if the goy is not around, the person who's threatened or person whose possessions are threatened could go out and call him. Af al pi shevadai haveh k'sheyavo. Even though he's definitely going to put this thing out when he comes. So effectively, your hint here ain't no hint, because once you call him and he walks into your house and he sees a fire and you say, "Kol ha-mehabeh eno mafsid," you effectively don't even have to say it because it doesn't mean anything that you're saying, right?
Because you see it, it's visible.
It's visible. And now Maran goes further and he says, and this is like any other threatening damage that comes as a surprise. So he's referencing what we just learned, which is written 150 pages earlier, 100 pages earlier. He's referencing that. And he's saying that in his language, he's saying that any surprise threat is dealt with this way. So to your question of a minute ago, Michael, are we talking about this being the case because it's fire and there's a greater potential threat as a result of it or not? Right now, according to Maran, it seems like because the threat was sudden and unexpected, I can go out and call the goy, knowing that as soon as he comes to the house, he's going to get it. Why? Not because it's fire, according to Maran so far, but because it's sudden and unexpected and threatening. Okay?
Uh-huh.
כגון, אם נתראה חבית של יין, יכול לקרוא אינו יהודי אף על פי שוודאי כמנו כשיבוא. So Maran continues and says, and similar to this, is if a barrel of wine started to leak, I can go call the goy to come to my house and then hint to him. But we know that as soon as I called the goy, the hint is almost a sketch, right? Because by calling him, I already made clear what's going on here. Okay, so now, according to Maran, you would say that he's affirming what he said some time back, right? Right? He's affirming it because this was the position he took, right? He's just making it more explicit, more detailed, that you could go out and call the guy and you don't have to be concerned about it. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says on that.
In part, are they allowing you to go and call the goy because you don't need to necessarily explain to them what's going on? Because once you call them, they know. That's why they're maybe a little bit more lenient.
Okay, maybe. I mean, but the fact that you're calling them
because all you're doing is calling them. You're not calling them and then saying, "Look, the building's on fire, so I need you to, do X, Y, and Z."
So the question is, what say you tell him, "Hey, Anthony, can you come by now? And can you come by now?" And he says, "I'm a little tied up." Then can you push him a little further?
No, because if you call them and say the building's on fire, good. A little bit of a remez, but I got it. I'm running right over.
Okay, good. So good. Okay, good. So you can do that. The answer is you can do that.
Right.
You can call him and say the building is on fire, knowing that he's going to go ahead and do an isur d'oraita on your behalf.
Right. Without you directing specifically what to do, because they get it.
Yeah, they get it. But by the fact that they got it, so quickly and clearly is really because it was said fairly clearly, and that's
Right.
okay.
So it kind of is a direct, do
Yeah,
X,
kind
Y,
of
and Z.
is. That's the Hidush. The Hidush is that it
Okay.
kind of is. Right.
Okay.
That's the Hidush. Okay, Mishnah B'Rav Chen. She'eno omer lo kaber. He's saying, don't go out and tell him directly, put out the fire. Don't tell him directly. Avoid that. Like you're saying a minute ago, it's obvious. Let him see the flames, see the house on fire. You're calling him, So let him, if you can avoid telling him, put it out, avoid it, even though it's pashut. He says, different than Maran says, he says, he says, if you put it out, you won't lose out. He says, should not be said, which we said last time as well. But again, we wrote that kol ha-mehabeh eno mafsid, which is 1 degree less direct. Anybody who puts out this fire won't lose out, as opposed to if you put out the fire, you won't lose out. One is more direct than the other, and if the more direct reference could be avoided, it should be. Right? Kol ha-mechabeh eno mafsid. I'm making a general proclamation. Kol hamatzil eno mafsid. Anybody who puts out the fire, anybody who saves the grain, anybody who saves the house, eno mafsid, will not lose. Instead of saying, im techabeh lo tafsid. Im meaning, if you save it, if you put out the fire, you won't lose out as a result. So our rabbis are saying, avoid that more direct statement. Well, what do you mean? Didn't I go out and tell him to come here? Yes, I had to do that. Now I had to do that. But now I can be a little less clear in my language, be a little less clear. Okay? That's where we are so far.
So it's not free reins to do whatever you want.
No, that's right.
Do what needs to be
Yes,
done.
you can.
This is, otherwise you can't get the guy there unless you tell him what's going on. And then once you're there, see if you can be a little less direct.
Exactly. Very good. Very good. 1 minute. Let's read another one. Okay, now let's read the Ramah. And the Ramah is going to qualify it a little bit. We read the Sfaradi opinion. Now we're going to read the Ashkenaz opinion, and we're going to go down the road, maybe one more session, and we're going to narrow it down and qualify exactly what we do. And now the Ramah is speaking, the Ashkenaz opinion. Any of these rules that are referenced when we're talking about issues of fire, it was talking about back in those days, 500 years ago, he says. In our days, she'anu shurim ben enam Yehudim, v'hi hashash sakanat nefashot, these days that we live amongst goyim, and people live much closer together, and there's a real concern of life being threatened. כתבו הראשונים והאחרונים שמותר לכבות דלקה בשבת משום יש בה סכנת נפשות והזריז הרי זה משובח. He says, in a case whether it's a life-threatening situation to you or to somebody else, even a goy, even in parentheses, in quotation marks, yes, you're going to see that it's not so pashut. He says, if there's life-threatening situation, ben hagoyim, hashash sakanat nefashot, and there's a concern about life-threatened, katfu arishanim v'aharonim, the early rabbis and the later great rabbis, that you can put out the fire, mishum diyesh ba sakanat nefashot. You could put the fire out because there is concern of life. V'azariz, and the person who does it sooner, that person is praiseworthy. Mikol makom, he says, hakol lefi anyan. He said, but in any case, it's all about the circumstances. If it was obvious or certain, It says, if it was clear that there really wasn't a risk to life, then no, you can't put it out. You got to go through the whole system that we talked about in getting the goy there and hinting to the goy. So if there's obvious risk to life, even if it's not your life, not a Jewish life, then you go ahead and you do what you have to do. And kol hazariz harei meshubach. Anybody who moves faster, that person will be praised. But if there's no issue like that, so it says, if we're certain that that there's certainly no life-threatening risk here, you can't put it out. You have to get the other guy to do it. But if there's a concern about a possible risk, there's not a definite risk. There's a concern, hashash, about a safek hadaka, safek sakana, a possible risk. You can put out the fire even in the house of a goy, meaning that
a possible risk to life, right? Not to anything monetary.
Fire doesn't always start out as a risk right away. Right? Like, is that what it's saying? Like, it could start small, but between the time that it takes to become a risk to life, that short amount of time, can you do it yourself, but you have to run and get the goy?
No, so yeah, exactly right. So what we're saying is, in the case of a life-threatening risk by fire, whether it's the risk is to a Jewish person's life or to the life of a goy, you go ahead and put it out yourself. If the risk of the fire is to monetary possessions or physical possessions, then you get the goy there and you hint to him to do it. Anybody who puts out a fire will not lose as a result of doing so. So the chidush here is that the Rama is saying that I can go ahead and be mechalel Shabbat for the life of a goy. That's not so simple. It's not so simple. We live in a world where we care a lot about the goyim, right? We look at everybody as a life. That wasn't always the case in the world, So what the Rama is saying is a big thing. And what some of the rabbis do is they say something interesting. They say, because if we didn't care about them, they would come back and take revenge against us. Because there's a real question here. For whom can I violate Shabbat? So, we learned we can't violate Shabbat to save a possession, but we can engage a goy appropriately to do so. Okay, can I violate Shabbat to save the life of a non-Jew? We would say, based on our Western mentality, of course. But that's not necessarily clear in the halakha. So the rabbis say that yes, the Rama says yes. We're going to go a little further into this next time. The Rama says yes, but he says why? Because we have to live with people. And we have to know that if we don't have regard for other people, well, then they're going to come back at us. In other words, it's not a Western thing of every life is equal. Although we feel that way and we may carry on our lives that way, from a strict halachic point of view, it's not that way. And that's why we're saying that, yes, there could be a blowback against the Jewish community and therefore, or the Jewish individual, and therefore go and save the person.
Well, I didn't think it was, I didn't think that was the reason behind it. I would just think that, Hashem created everyone and, you have to care about, all life.
That's how we live and that's how we think. But we don't live in a time when goyim murdered us or pillaged us, or right. We don't live in those times. We're really maybe the first generation ever since before the Churban of the first Beit Mikdash, the destruction of the first Beit Mikdash, that isn't subject to those things.
Right. We don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
Not to worry about, and that's very, very recent and short-lived, right? up to 70 years ago, it was the opposite extreme. So we don't live that way, not here and not Europe, and certainly not in Israel. But for 2,000 years, that's how we lived. So we have to understand the whole package here. So the Hidush here is that you can directly violate Shabbat to save Goy's life, in brackets, because if you don't do so, there's a real possibility that there will be an exacting price taken against you or the Jewish.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Crazy.
All right, guys, great to see you.
By the way,
Thank you.
Ricky, I wanted to tell you last night. Do you know a historian? His name is Nachiel from Israel.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, you went to the Met with him?
We went to the Met with him last night. It was off the charts.
Really?
The whole family, my mother-in-law, all of us, like 10 of us. We got a whole tour, and in the archaeology wing, and he showed us, the assimilation between the Jews and the Romans and the Greeks, and how history played out. And we went through artifacts, and it was really awesome. It was great.
Wow. I have to do it. Richie told me he did it. Your dad, I saw him yesterday. He told me that you guys were going.
Yeah.
How great. How
It
great.
was great. Right after Shabbat, the museum was pretty much empty. It was like a private tour. We had the whole museum to ourselves. It was
Wow.
fascinating.
Super. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Great
we'd love
time.
to do it. Good things.
All
All
right.
right.
All right,
Thank
Ricky.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoy.
You too. Bye.